Flight 728 had only been in the air for 6 minutes when they duct taped the black CEO's child to his seat. What they didn't know was that in the next 5, he would shut down boarding systems in 14 international airports. Now rewind. Let's start with the sound that broke everything. Rip. The sound sliced through the cabin like a box cutter. Jaden Bellamy's hands, once animatedly mimicking planes mid-air, snapped still as the thick strip of duct tape tightened across his forearms, pinning him to the armrests of seat 1A. His voice caught in his throat. "Daddy?" he whispered, barely audible. Across from him, Victor Bellamy didn't shout. He didn't lunge. He simply looked up, face unreadable, as if freezing the entire moment with a stare. The man kneeling beside his son, Lance, the flight attendant, kept his eyes down, focused, mechanical, not a flicker of remorse. "He's disturbing the cabin," Lance muttered. Victor's voice was quiet. "He asked a question about your scanner." "He raised his voice," Lance replied, finishing the second loop of tape. "Protocol." Jaden blinked. His lips trembled, but he didn't cry. Not yet. A passenger across the aisle shifted uncomfortably. Another pretended to sleep. No one intervened. No one asked why a first-class child had just been restrained mid-air like a threat. Victor leaned forward slowly. He reached across the armrest and placed a calm, grounding hand on his son's. "I'm here," he whispered. "You didn't do anything wrong." Then he sat back, expression neutral, gaze forward. No anger, just something colder. From the silver band on his wrist, he tapped twice. Back in Palo Alto, deep inside Cortex Gate's command terminal, a silent protocol came to life. Seagate Omega. Execute. 5 minutes later, across 14 international airports, boarding systems powered by Cortex Gate AI began to fail, one by one. Flights halted. First-class lanes jammed. A silent war had just started in the clouds. And Victor Bellamy? He didn't blink. "If this shook you already, tell us where you're watching from, because what's coming will freeze more than just flights." The turbulence outside was nothing compared to the quiet shaking inside the systems. Exactly 5 minutes after Victor tapped his wrist, a technician in the operations center at Heathrow frowned at her screen. "Is the boarding AI down?" she muttered. Seconds later, JFK's biometric terminal froze mid-scan. In Dubai, Frankfurt, Tokyo, Cortex Gate's facial recognition interface blinked once, then went dark. At first, the staff thought it was an update, a reboot, but then it hit the control tower in Madrid. Then Sao Paulo. 14 international airports, all using Cortex Gate's boarding protocol, lost access to first-class biometric data simultaneously. Back in the air, on Flight 728, Lance the flight attendant was smiling politely now, serving wine to another passenger as if nothing had happened. Jaden hadn't moved. The tape was still tight across his arms. His tablet had fallen to the floor. Screen cracked down the middle. Victor looked down at his son's hands. Small. Still. Then his gaze drifted toward the window, watching clouds roll beneath the wings. He didn't speak. He calculated. Inside Victor's mind, numbers were already forming. $1.2 billion. The total contract value of Cortex Gate's API access across those 14 airports. The moment he triggered the Seagate Omega command, all linked systems went into read-only lockdown, which meant airlines couldn't board high-value passengers, couldn't verify credentials, couldn't explain why, and the real problem, they wouldn't know who locked them out until it was far too late. Victor's phone buzzed in his pocket. A secure message from Cortex Gate. Omega executed. Red status confirmed. Black flag protocol armed. His jaw barely moved. Only his eyes narrowed slightly. He hadn't just frozen systems. He'd armed the trap. "Daddy," Jaden whispered. "Why did he tape me?" Victor exhaled slowly, resting a hand gently on his son's shoulder. "Because some people think silence is the same as obedience," he said. Jaden blinked. So, do we stay quiet? Victor looked at him, finally smiling, but not from joy, from clarity. Not this time. You're only seeing the surface. Beneath it, the system just lost control. By the time Flight 728 touched down in Los Angeles, the media storm was already spinning. Victor hadn't said a word to reporters. But that didn't stop the headlines. Child disrupts flight, forcing emergency crew response. Unruly behavior in first class. Safety measures questioned. They used words like incident, protocol, and disruption, but never once said what really happened. They didn't mention the Duct tape. They didn't mention Jaden was 8 years old. They definitely didn't mention his father was Victor Bellamy, the man behind the very system their airlines depended on. Victor watched the news loop silently on the flat screen in his private car. Jaden was asleep beside him, finally unbound, but his wrists still showed the faint red marks. Victor's lawyer, Aisha Grant, sat across from him, flipping through a folder. "They're shaping the narrative fast," she said, "and they're using language that paints Jaden as a threat." Victor didn't respond. His fingers were already gliding across his phone, unlocking the internal log system tied to Flight 728. Camera angles, audio clips, crew activity logs. Everything was there, because Cortex Gate installed passive behavioral mapping on all AI-integrated flights. Not for spying, for pattern detection. And what the logs showed was damning. Jaden had been tagged at boarding with a containment flag before he'd said a single word. The system had predicted he might escalate, based solely on a flawed risk model. "Behavioral flagging?" Aisha said, reading over his shoulder. "They're still using that garbage?" Victor's jaw tightened. Not for long. Back at the Cortex Gate Command Center in Palo Alto, engineers were already reverse tracing the flag path. It led to a subroutine that hadn't been cleared in over 2 years. A legacy script nicknamed Echo Control. Still active, still biased, still marking young black children as noise before they ever made a sound. Victor leaned back, watching Jaden sleep. Victor leaned back, watching Jaden sleep. Innocent, tired, unaware of how close the world had come to swallowing him in silence. Victor's voice was low, almost to himself. They tried to erase what happened before it even began. Victor Bellamy wasn't just a CEO. He was the silent architect of the system thousands of flights used every single day. Cortex Gate wasn't just his company. It was his design, down to the logic tree beneath every boarding gate and crew flag. And now, it had turned on his son. In a private suite at the Bellamy compound in Palo Alto, Victor stood before a massive wall of screens. Lines of code blinked behind maps of airport networks. He wasn't angry, not in the way people expected. He was calculating. Across from him, his lead systems engineer, Mara Lynn, swallowed hard. "Victor, the subroutine that flagged Jaden, it's not even an active ops anymore. It was buried." Victor nodded. "Legacy code. Left behind from our joint testing with AeroCorps 3 years ago. That's when FAA insisted on threat ranking models for high-risk passengers." He didn't answer, because he remembered. Back then, he'd warned them that input data based on race, age, and volume of voice was dangerous. That combining biometric scans with behavior prediction would backfire. They'd ignored him, and now his son had paid the price. Mara added, "The tape? There's a line item for it, hidden under cabin disturbance tools. It's not even illegal." Victor stared at that line on the screen, then turned toward his private console. He typed one command: Cortex Gate, override, admin lockout, system review, global. "Send it to every airport currently under contract," he said. "Effective immediately." Mara blinked. "That's over 70 hubs." "Good," he said. Back in LA, reporters waited outside the Bellamy estate. They expected a press conference, a lawyer, a carefully worded statement. Instead, they got silence, and then an alert. Cortex Gate was temporarily disabling all passenger flagging systems across its global network. Victor closed his laptop, and for the first time in days, he sat beside Jaden on the floor. No screens, no firewalls, just a father and son breathing. The first airline to panic was East Wave. Their morning flights out of London, Singapore, and Miami were delayed without warning. Boarding systems locked. Gate scanners refused all inputs. Even manual overrides failed. Passengers fumed. Crews scrambled. But nothing worked. The Cortex Gate system had entered black flag mode. At the heart of the chaos, a simple dashboard message blinked. Passenger ethics protocol not met. System halted by owner authority. What none of them realized, at least not yet, was that Victor Bellamy wasn't just halting boarding. He was triggering a silent audit of their entire operational behavior. In Chicago, executives at SkyTide Airways stared at the red lights cascading across their fleet monitor. "Why are only our premium lanes shut down?" one VP barked. "Because," the compliance director said slowly, "we just failed our passenger equity review. We've been flagged." Meanwhile, Victor sat in a quiet room, watching the dashboard data stream in real time. Jaden sat beside him, coloring in silence. "Daddy?" he asked. "What's a flag?" Victor paused, then answered without looking away. "It's a tag people use when they think someone is a problem, before they even do anything." Jaden thought about that. Then, "But who decides what's a problem?" Victor finally turned to him. "That's what I'm fixing." Behind them, the system kept working, quietly scraping 10 years of biometric flight data across 42 airports, isolating trends. And what it showed was damning. Children of color were 12 times more likely to be flagged as disruptive by auto-learning crew systems. The youngest flagged child? Just 3 years old. Victor didn't need a press conference. He had proof. Now, he just needed everyone else to feel the consequences. By the third day, the headlines had changed. $920 million frozen in aviation tech disruptions. Airports paralyzed by mysterious Cortex Gate lockouts. Is this the beginning of an AI ethics reckoning? What began as a loud child story had evolved into a full-blown aviation crisis. 14 airports had suspended biometric boarding. 21 more were under ethics review. And airlines that once boasted about smart gate efficiency were now begging for manual backups. Inside FAA headquarters in DC, the Emergency Aviation Ethics Council was convened for the first time in 7 years. One official slammed her folder shut. "We gave them too much control, and now one man, one engineer, has locked out half the network." Across the table, someone muttered, "That man built the network." Meanwhile, at a press conference in San Francisco, a corporate spokesperson tried to spin. "This is just a temporary technical review. We are cooperating fully with Cortex Gate leadership." Reporters weren't buying it. Back in Palo Alto, Victor received an encrypted call. It wasn't from the airlines. It was from the Senate Ethics Committee. "Mr. Bellamy, your audit data is compelling," the voice said. "We'd like you to testify." Victor didn't flinch. "Gladly, but not just for my son. For every child like him." At home, Jaden walked into the room with a blanket and juice box. "Daddy, why are they mad?" Victor knelt down, brushing his son's curls gently. "Because I didn't let them pretend it never happened." And he meant it. Because this time there were no more private settlements, no NDAs, no polite emails to legal, just systems shutting down, data going public, and the industry's leaders finally realizing they hadn't just hurt one boy. They'd built a machine that punished thousands like him, in silence. The Senate chamber was packed. Cameras lined the walls. Reporters scribbled notes. The scrolling ticker at the bottom of every screen read, "Cortex Gate founder testifies on AI discrimination in aviation." Victor Bellamy sat still. calm. He wore no flashy suit, no corporate lapel pin, just a navy jacket and a quiet look that said, "I didn't come here to defend myself. I came to expose you." Senator Abrams leaned forward. "Mr. Bellamy, are you telling us that your own system targeted your child because of race?" Victor didn't blink. "No. I'm telling you that the system you approved and the algorithms your vendors trained flagged my son before he even spoke. I built the structure. You chose the data." Gasps echoed through the gallery. Victor reached into his folder and slid a sheet across the table. "Page 14. Look at the flag history." Senator Abrams scanned the document, frowning. "These are 3-year-olds, tagged as behavioral threats before boarding," Victor said. "All flagged by predictive AI. 92% were black or brown. 73% were children under the age of 10. Not a single white child was flagged in the top 100 risk cases." A long silence followed. Then Senator Liu, the youngest member on the committee, spoke softly. "And what do you want us to do about it?" Victor looked up. "Require an audit trail on every AI flight system that uses passenger data. Ban black box flagging. Mandate ethics review for every automated protocol, and name it after my son. Jaden." A pause, and then quiet nods. Outside the hearing room, Aisha waited with Jaden. He wore his best shirt and clutched a plush airplane in his hand. "Did Daddy win?" he asked. Aisha smiled. "He didn't come to win. He came to change the rules." 3 weeks later, the skies were quieter than usual. Not because fewer planes were flying, but because every airline was undergoing the largest ethics system overhaul in aviation history. And it all started with one child and one tape. Victor stood inside the FAA command center, surrounded by monitors glowing with red, yellow, and green codes. Each color told a story. Red: system flagged for racial bias, yellow. Pending review, green. Cleared under the new ethics charter. 21 airports fully transitioned, the director said. 17 more in progress. Every airline CEO signed the compliance packet. Victor nodded. "What about the legacy vendors?" The director sighed. "Half pulled out. They refused to meet the transparency requirements." "Then they're done," Victor said. "No more black boxes." Across the country, flight attendants now carried new devices, not just to report passenger behavior, but to record crew tone, bias indicators, and body language. At boarding gates, systems no longer auto-flagged children for high energy. Every decision now required human confirmation and a written explanation. And passengers? They were notified of any internal notes written about them, with a right to dispute them before boarding. One clause changed everything. The Passenger Fairness Clause, a 4-line policy now printed on every boarding pass. It read, "Every passenger has the right to dignity. Every child has the right to noise. Every crew has the right to support. No system has the right to judge alone." In a quiet moment, Victor visited Jaden's school. He sat in the back during recess, watching his son chase a paper plane through the air. Jaden didn't know what had changed, but Victor did, because the industry no longer belonged to automation. It now belonged to accountability. It didn't feel like a celebration. There were no balloons, no headlines screaming victory, just a quiet update pushed through the Federal Aviation System core at 2:16 p.m. That was it. No speech, no applause. But in that single line, the rules changed nationwide. Victor Bellamy didn't announce it. He didn't need to, because behind closed doors in D.C., the Flight Ethics Charter, drafted from his data and testimony, had just passed unanimously. Airlines were now required to adopt the Jaden Protocol if they wanted to retain federal aviation certification. It wasn't optional. It wasn't negotiable. Every passenger screening system now had a built-in safeguard for children under 12. Every cabin crew system now included mandatory bias training and behavioral override fail-safes. And perhaps most quietly powerful of all, Every incident of in-flight restraint or flagging now required post-flight audit by a third-party civilian ethics board. The days of crew discretion were over. In Palo Alto, Victor stood at the observation deck overlooking the Cortex Gate data hall. Below, engineers were pushing the final compliance patches into Skybridge, FlightFlow, and 13 other partner networks. Mara, his lead engineer, walked up beside him. "It's done," she said softly. Victor nodded. "Not done, just better." She smiled. "We named the script Jaden Flag in the core library. Capital letters. Couldn't think of a better tribute." Victor's voice was low. "He won't even know what that means until he's older." "Doesn't matter," she said. "The system knows." Elsewhere across the country, something subtle began happening. Parents received alerts when their children were flagged. Kids were greeted with warmth instead of suspicion when boarding. And passengers began asking questions, real ones, when they saw someone treated unfairly. At Jaden's school, Victor watched him give a class presentation titled, "What if computers could be fair?" The teacher clapped. His friends smiled. Jaden grinned. He didn't know the world had changed because of him. Victor did. Because every time a child laughs loudly in first class without fear, every time a crew member hesitates before judging a young voice, every time a system pauses to ask, "Is this right?" That's Jaden. Not just the boy, the line of code, the principle, the legacy. He came home taped. He returned as a protocol, not out of revenge, but to make sure the next child never needs to be unwrapped just to be heard. It happened quietly, like most things that matter. No sirens, no protests. Just one subtle change on the flight deck interface used by every U.S. airline. A small icon now appeared whenever a child under 12 was flagged. Under Jaden protection, manual review required. At first, some crew rolled their eyes. "Another policy update," they muttered. But then came the first case. A 6-year-old Latino boy, Mateo, flagged at gate B32 for erratic behavior. Before, that would have triggered auto-review and a potential denial. Now, the system paused. A crew member hesitated. She walked over, asked a real question. Turns out, Mateo wasn't misbehaving. He was trying to comfort his autistic sister mid-meltdown. In Spanish. That flight took off, without incident, without harm, because the system blinked. Because someone paused. And that pause? That was the Jaden effect. Back in DC, the FAA published its quarterly ethics compliance audit. The results were shocking. Passenger restraint incidents dropped by 61%, flagged children under 12 reduced by 89%, public complaints tied to crew bias dropped below 2% for the first time in 15 years. The industry had not only adapted, it had evolved. Victor Bellamy received the report at his home office. He didn't smile. He didn't cry. He just forwarded it to Aisha with 2 words. It worked. Meanwhile, a group of former airline whistleblowers, those once ignored, blacklisted, even fired, launched the Flight Fairness Foundation with Cortex Gate backing. Their mission? Train the next generation of crew to understand that dignity isn't a policy. It's a muscle. You use it or you lose it. On a quiet Tuesday, Victor took Jaden to the airport, not to fly, but to walk the terminal. At gate C-10, a black father gently corrected a gate agent who mispronounced his daughter's name. The agent listened, nodded, and apologized, genuinely. Victor watched. "That wasn't tech," he whispered to Jaden. "That was change." Jaden beamed. "Did we do that?" Victor knelt. "You did." 12 months after the incident, something extraordinary happened. It didn't trend. It didn't make the front page. But in Geneva, at the International Civil Aviation Organization's annual summit, a new clause was voted into Global Aviation Protocol. The name? Passenger Fairness Index, PFI. A quiet standard born out of noise. It wasn't flashy, just a mandatory ethics scoring system applied to all airlines seeking international operation licenses. Every carrier now had to prove their passenger flagging system was transparent, auditable, and bias mitigated. Their crew training included quarterly emotional intelligence refreshers. Their child restraint policies were monitored and reviewed by a civilian ethics board. Their AI learning models excluded historic discriminatory data, and the clause wasn't drafted by politicians. It was authored by engineers. Victor Bellamy's engineers. More than half of the international aviation sector adopted it within 90 days. Why? Because the FAA, ICAO, and several intergovernmental aviation bodies had issued a joint statement. Any airline that fails to comply with the Passenger Fairness Index will forfeit flight certifications in participating countries. Overnight, fairness became a global operating condition. Back in the US, the airline that Duct taped Jayden no longer existed, not in its original form. After a federal inquiry and public ethics audit, it merged into a joint entity under new ownership. The new CEO, a former ethics investigator who once helped shut down military black sites. She didn't care for PR. She cared for systems that don't excuse harm. Every gate agent under her now recites one line before every shift. I don't judge passengers, I serve them. Meanwhile, the Cortex Gate Protocol, once dismissed as experimental, became the core compliance gateway for 42 countries. No boarding system could launch unless it passed the Jayden compliance test. What began as one father's pain became a framework too embedded to ignore. Victor never gave another press conference. He didn't write a book. He didn't tour campuses. Instead, he taught a quiet ethics seminar at Stanford. Class size, 12 students. Subject, invisible power, how systems choose sides. When asked about his experience, he always started with the same words. My son wasn't the problem, the system was. And one by one, those 12 students entered industries, from aviation to education to fintech, rewriting the rules where assumptions used to live. On the one-year mark, Jayden stood in a small auditorium at his school's diversity showcase. His shirt read, "Loud isn't bad." He read a short poem. I was loud, you were scared, but now you pause because you care. The room went quiet, then erupted. Victor sat in the back, tears in his eyes, but none fell. He wasn't broken. He was watching justice take root, not in lawsuits or hashtags, but in policies, in code, in the way people now looked at children like his. At Gate C5 of San Francisco International, a black mother stood holding her child's hand. The little boy, maybe 5, was bouncing, laughing, eyes wide at the sight of planes outside the glass. He wasn't quiet, he wasn't still, and no one asked him to be. A nearby flight attendant smiled gently. She leaned over and whispered to the mom, "He reminds me of my nephew. Keep him loud." The mother blinked, almost startled, because a year ago, those same words would have been a warning. Now, they were a welcome upstairs, tucked into a quiet executive lounge. Victor Bellamy watched the scene unfold on a live feedback stream. Not surveillance, but a voluntary camera embedded in the terminal's ethics audit feed. He wasn't checking for failure. He was checking for proof. Proof that everything his son endured wasn't wasted. Across the screen, a soft beep lit up. Jayden code verified. Ethics flag cleared for minor movement. Victor exhaled, closed the laptop. He wasn't here to monitor. He was here to speak. Minutes later, he walked into a private summit with the new heads of 5 major U.S. airlines. On the table, the final draft of the Passenger Rights Integrity Pact, the culmination of over 14 months of coordinated reform. Each airline had already undergone review. Each one had seen incidents drop. Each one had watched public trust rebound. But this last step, this was different. Signing the pact meant embedding the flight ethics protocol into their corporate charters. Not just policy, but identity. Victor stood at the front, no slides, no podium. "I'm not here to convince you," he began. "You've already seen the numbers. You've seen the faces of families returning to air travel without fear. But what you haven't seen is what happens when a 5-year-old grows up knowing the system didn't swallow his story. It rewrote itself around it." He paused. "You've signed compliance forms, audits, safety checks. But this isn't paperwork. This is who you become when no one's watching." The room was still. One by one, the CEOs stood and signed. When the last signature dried, Victor sat, quiet, steady. No applause, no champagne, just a small nod. The air had changed. Meanwhile, in a classroom in Oakland, Jaden was drawing with crayons. The assignment? Draw a rule you think the world should follow. Jaden didn't write a sentence. He drew a plane. A little boy sat in first class, smiling, looking out the window. Next to him, a crew member handed him a juice box, not duct tape. On the side of the plane, he wrote just 4 words in bold blue crayon. "Let us stay loud." The teacher leaned over. "What does that mean, Jaden?" He smiled. "It means you don't have to be quiet just to feel safe." The teacher nodded, then quietly wiped a tear. Weeks later, an unexpected package arrived at the Bellamy home. Inside was a leather-bound document, gold embossed. At the top, United States Department of Transportation. The enclosed letter read, "Dear Mr. Bellamy, in recognition of your efforts to reshape federal aviation ethics, we are honored to rename the National AI Passenger Compliance Standard, the Jaden Bellamy Fair Skies Act. May it serve as a legacy of accountability, protection, and belief that all children, regardless of volume or color, deserve safety without sacrifice." Signed, Secretary of Transportation, National Aviation Ethics Commission, Joint FAA Reform Task Force. Victor stared at the page for a long time. He didn't cry. He simply walked down the hall to Jaden's room, where his son lay asleep, a paper plane on the pillow. Victor kissed his forehead and whispered, "They put your name in the sky." Epilogue. At airports around the country, subtle things had changed. Announcements now included lines like, "As part of our Fair Skies commitment, we honor the dignity of every passenger." Crew manuals started with a quote from Victor's first Senate testimony. "The system didn't break. It performed as designed. That's why we had to redesign the system." And in dozens of cities, new airline recruits took a single ethics oath on day 1. "We protect the loud, we respect the quiet, and we pause before we judge." None of this made headlines. None of it went viral. But it stayed, in the air, in the code, in the look a child gets when they're seen, not scanned. Justice didn't arrive with rage. It arrived with structure. It didn't roar. It resonated. And now, whenever a child laughs on a plane and no one flinches, that's Jaden. Have you ever witnessed injustice during a flight? Do you believe technology can truly protect fairness and dignity on board? Don't forget to subscribe to Karma Telltales for more stories like this, where quiet power rewrites the rules, and justice doesn't need to scream to be heard.